Welcome to Parallax. Parallax, the construction amidst eternal decay. Parallax, the portal to the edge of chaos. Parallax, poem and provocation.
Well, it turns out that Turio, and by the way, having Turio here tonight means that we've really gone full Crazy Wisdom podcast. We should rename the whole thing Crazy Wisdom from now on, because this is definitely going to go Crazy Wisdom. So Turio is an old friend of mine, and we do a lot of work together, spiritual work, men's work, and all kinds of shit. And he and I are totally infatuated with shaman culture in Peru, the Wachuma traditions, you know, the psychedelic practices in the Andean mountains, and the ayahuasca traditions and all that. And we're kind of experts at it, both Turio and I. And he's also intensely interested in Zoroastrianism. I don't know if he's formally convert or not. Nobody cares, really, either you're Zoroastrian or you're not. But it turns out that in this conversation on the intellectual deep web with you guys, Tim and Andrew, because you are two in-house Vajrayana Crazy Wisdom teachers, it turns out that Turio is quite an expert on Vajrayana Buddhism too. So I just thought, okay, this is the obvious one. This is the obvious one when we open our hearts, and it's just not Andrew, Tim, and Alexander any longer. We invite a fourth guy, and we're now a complete quadrant. The brotherhood has been sealed. Crazy Wisdom has been confirmed. And Turio, over to you.
Yeah,
how about you? Your relationship to the Central Asian Indian traditions and your relationship to the Peruvian Mexican traditions?
Oh, my relationship. So I started with Osho, with the rebel guy. And I found through reading him that he was constantly pointing towards other people. He was never pointing towards what he was teaching. He was always taking the piss on other people, traditions. So very Nietzschean. So what I encountered with his work, with the traditions I had to, I don't know, methods and all these kind of things, he forced people to look for themselves. He doesn't allow you to stay with his ideas. He forces you to look for yourself. And that is actually what brought me in parallel to Vajrayana, because I thought, like, there is something about the specificity, about the detailedness they talk about, which caught my attention. There is something of that juice that I really like. And then the Andean connection, which was basically introduced through you. I mean, we met through ayahuasca, and I was like, Alexander's talking about 12 hours of being high on a psychedelic. Why am I afraid of that? Oh, let's do it. Let's drink. So that thing was, to me, like a revelation, especially the understanding of it being a mountain psychedelic. And that kind of top view, or the metaphorical use of the condor and the hummingbird, is very interesting to look upon what's actually going on inside, outside. And then this is in no way different to what I have found in the Eastern traditions. Now, and here is also the link to Zoroastrianism, because what I found with the Andean tradition, it is always about, quote unquote, the contribution, love, the good, the right thing to do, be, talk. And the East does the same. So there is a conversion of all these things, which is a passion for me.
So, yeah, I mean, mountain, I think, is key here. We talk a lot about mountains in this podcast. So why do monks and nuns seek mountains? Why do they seek that overview? The view, as Tim often talks about here. So that's a good connection. And I would say that I found in Iran and in Peru and in Mexico that these cultures are more in common with each other. And then, you know, the river valley cultures of, say, Mesopotamia, which is Iraq today, you know, China and northern India have a lot more in common with each other, because the topography basically decides how we humans become. We become the sort of landscapes we live in. We become the climates we live in. We know that already. That affects us tremendously. But the fact that we're seeking these mountains, and often mountains along trade routes, because they can also make a living by being spiritual guides. And obviously that's exactly why you find these deepest spiritual traditions, the most esoteric traditions, are always going to be located in mountains. So for me to come to a wooden temple in the mountains of Japan, come to a fire temple in the Caucasus, or the first time I came to Chavinduantar in Peru to drink the mescaline together with the Huachomeros, the experiences were so identical. They were so similar. And of course, the first time I came to do Wakefana, southern Ethiopia, same thing. Mountain cultures. So there's something about us, the four of us, I think, that pulls us up onto the mountains because we're supposed to be there. That's the proper shamanic territory.
Well, interesting. My own teacher at Traktim Kepo talks about mountain practitioners and town practitioners. So the people who practice in the town, it's often more advantageous to practice in the most intense kind of urban atmosphere in Vajrayana. This is one kind of practice, right in the intensity of the most intense place, like Times Square, or something, is the best place to practice in some ways. And then there's other people who have more of a tendency to go to the mountains and practice in a more, in solitude or in smaller groups. And they have a different quality, and even the way they chant in Tibet, the mountain people chant with very deep, low voices, and the valley people chant with higher. They sing more and they chant with high. So that's a very interesting dichotomy, I think, and complementarity.
Well, I'd say that anybody should be able to do the practice in the mountains, and that's the stage to start from. But some people have the capacity to be in urban environments or even sitting on the subway train or whatever, and then totally still do the sort of isolation required for spiritual practice. Spiritual practice is always in solitude. But not everybody is capable of being solitary in an urban, intense environment. Or say, for example, the sort of digital environment we have here, which is also overloaded with information all the time.
I mean, clearly the tantric aspect is exactly that, invoking the mountain in the subway instead of needing the mountain. And I think that is like then the sutric way. Oh, I go fuck off for some months and I come back. And then I'm suddenly, oh, this is too much. And then I go back again, which is the rat race of society. So it's like, how can you keep that solitude in the urban?
Yeah, not everybody's capable of it. That's what we build monasteries.
Yeah.
And that's our big project here in Scandinavia at the moment. There are already a couple of monasteries up and running, and we're going to build more of them. I have my own vision. I want to do the fire temple version of it, but that's what we're doing now. I think that need is just going to explode over the next 50 years. I think the best thing you can do if you have a property in the countryside in North America or Europe, invest in building a damn retreat center. The more AI takes care of everything else, the more people will be busy with themselves. Let's put it that way. And to retract, to get out of the entire sort of social theater of overloaded with information from the urban and the digital environments and go back into nature and the kind of solitude you can find there is intensely different. And that need is enormous.
Let me jump in here. Speaking to that, let me jump back to the first conversation that we had and where we ended with that. A quote from Holy Mountain by Jodorowsky, goodbye to the Holy Mountain, is how he ends it. Goodbye to the Holy Mountain, real life awaits us. And, I held up Osho's book, Tantric Transformation, and you have to wonder, okay, you're transforming, well, where are you going? What are you becoming? And if it is just someone isolated in a cave on a mountain, then great, fuck off. But you're a human being in the world.
Yeah, but this is Zoroastrian credo, Tim. That's why Zoroastrians are skeptical about pillar saints. That's exactly when you become your own loop and you just sit on a pillar as a saint, self-declared saint in the forest, and you left humanity. It's always a bunch of kids that come up to you and ask you, so what are you sitting doing here? Well, I'm sitting here meditating so I can be above everybody else. Yeah. What's the point with that? Is that to walk one day into the village and tell them you're higher than them? Yeah. Well, then you never left the village in the first place. You were just full of yourself. You're narcissistic. That's why there's always this sociont. There's always the service of the community in every spiritual tradition. Otherwise, it's not spirituality at all. Only American self-help individualism has sort of tried to create a religion where you're actually not supporting the community, to be part of the community at all. Even Pentecostal Christians are part of the community. Even they. Muslims are too. Everybody is. So the community is there. There are two ways of doing community, though, if you're doing spiritual practice. You could either be on the mountain to reload and get the necessary distance and retract to then go back into the community to serve it. Or you could be part of what I call the shamanic caste, which is, for example, a monastery. And at the monastery, some of the monks are serving other monks. And then those monks are serving the sociont. So there's a separate sociont of spirituality itself for the religious practitioners. And that's why it often becomes a full-time exercise, something you do. You devote your entire life to it. You say no to family and kids because you're going to be this monk. And the point being that kind of monk is that that monk is living in isolation, but there's a bridge between that monk and the community. But at the end of the day, the service of the community is everything. And then the question is, do you serve the community directly in the language of the community? That's what we call the sutra. Or do you actually take care of the shit and the community cannot take care of? But it has to be taken care of somewhere. It has to be hidden, has to be contained, and has to be dealt with. Then, for example, psychedelic practices are part of that. And if you do that, you're moving into the tantric realm. And that's exactly why we put the tantric realm on a mountain, separating the monastery. But speaking as a Zoroastrian, the reason why Zoroastrians are so skeptical of all these traditions of monks and nuns, and usually regard them as, no, they're falsehoods, is simply because we don't trust anybody who walks into the village with their nose high up in the air saying that they're spiritual.
Yeah. Well, in my own tradition, again, I'll speak from my own tradition. We're also very skeptical, and even we don't love the monastic tradition. It's a yogic tradition, so it's a tradition for kind of wild people. It's not a tradition for a bunch of monks and nuns living together, abiding by certain kinds of rules. It's not that there's contempt for that, but it's just not our style. And I think it's a fourth way style, if I can bring Gurdjieff into it. Gurdjieff talked about the sly way. And the sly way is you're able to live in the world. As Tim said, you're able to live anywhere, in any kind of situation, but you're sly in the sense that you hide your spiritual identity. You don't demonstrate it, to everybody. You don't show it off, kind of. But you're able to live in the world in a family, or in any kind of situation. And the Gurdjieff's tendency, for example, was to go to the center of Paris and sit at the Café de la Paix, the noisiest, dirtiest, and most annoying cafe in all of Paris, and write his books. He didn't. And when he would always go to the most difficult place, and people said, like, why don't you just live in, because he was a man of means, why he had money, and why don't you just live in a nice house in the country? He was like, because I'm a man and not a dog. He was very radical about going where the shock. He talked about the shocks of existence, the chaos was, the difficulty. He didn't want to move away from society. I think that's sort of the style of certain schools. It's not all.
But
schools.
it's
Me
also
and Tim's school,
yeah.
definitely the Kagyus and the Enigmas. We're much. There are monastic aspects of the Kagyus and the Enigmas, but there's also a really strong worldly schools.
Yeah, but there's another twist to it, because the social milieu of lots of people is very predictable. So it has a minimum of information, on the other hand, a minimum of social information. That's exactly why you live in a city. Everything becomes incredibly predictable. Simply because otherwise people couldn't handle it. And if you're going to live in a monastery, and this is why monasteries are necessary. That's why they're isolated. That's why they're containers. If you're going to go into tantric practice, that is intense. That is incredibly unpredictable. I think you guys would agree with me on this one, right? And if it's intense and unpredictable, you can't do it in a social milieu because that milieu is dependent on its predictability. So if you're going to have a very, very unpredictable environment, and Tantra is really, you know, when you go into tantric exercises of any kind, especially social tantric exercises, say you have an ayahuasca ceremony, 50 people drinking with ayahuasca, whatever, you have no idea what's going to happen. You must surf. And if you must surf, that's exactly why it has to be container in isolation, minimum information around you, because you're going to concentrate on people and their souls. And that's where the intensity is going to be. So that's also part of the mix. And I think this is the point with Kalandarya Sufi. We discussed that before. The Kalandarya Sufis who twisted the whole thing around, which is like the Tantra of Islam, or Tantra of the Islamic world. And the Kalandarya and the Bektashis, they were the ones who just twisted the whole thing around. You know, we talked about it before in this podcast about how you're closer to God in the brothel than you can ever be in the mosque. And that approach is a perfect tantric approach as well. And they mistrusted anybody who came to Damascus or Baghdad and walked around in the streets and thought they were fucking pillar saints and Gnostics and shit. And that's exactly why they moved straight into the gutter, became sex workers, drug addicts, whatever you wanted to do, and became real Kalandarya and Bektash Sufis, because that was more sincere. So I think it's all dialectical.
Yeah, and I think the idea of them was also to not be respectable, to be disrespectable, like not to have any kind of spiritual aura or authority or any of that, just to criticize the hypocrisy of all that, you know, in the most radical possible way. I think that's very alive in the Kagyu and the Nyingma tradition, is a dislike of that kind of spiritual hypocrisy or faux religiosity.
Yeah. Turio, back to you. So I want to go back to what you three guys are more informed about than I am, and that's the Vajrayana tradition. So what was your relationship, Turio, to Vajrayana? How did you get connected to it? You started with Osho, got more interested. So which one of the Tibetan masters or Indian masters did you study, or what came out of it that was important to you?
So my first Tibetan teacher is Tulku Lama Lobsang. He was born into a Kagyu family and then has been transferred to Gelugpa. And he is more known for any tantric practices according to the body. He was not interested in anything about the mind. He does not do initiations, but he initiates tantric practices themselves. So he got a huge backlash from the Tibetan community because they didn't like his approach.
A good idea is to put him on the timeline so that people know where he lived, when he lived. So, because we're going to talk about other guys, and sometimes we jump 1,000 years between the guys, and I think it's great for the audience to know that.
So, and then through him, I learned with two teachers. That's his one teacher from Bhutan, that's Kyabgong Rinpoche, and from him basically I got just initiations into the Red Goddess, mainly Avalokiteshvara, so compassion practice. And the other one is Khentrul Rinpoche, and he's a particular interesting one, why I refer to Shentong in our mail, because he comes from the Kala Chakra tradition, who are deep into the Shentong view, into the other emptiness from Dolpopa, which is the guy who wrote about this view. And my development with Tulkula, as we always called him, I practiced in several retreats with him, and then I asked him to give me initiation to take refuge. And then he forgot about it, and I reminded him again, and then, okay, after the break, and then I just, okay, you typically do a ceremony for these kind of things. And then I go into the stores and buy vegetables, fruits, nuts, and stuff like that, and a bowl of water, because that's what I had in mind. So I come back into the space, the whole crowd, the whole retreat people all went silent. I bring the offering to the teacher, and the teacher says in front of everybody, finally someone who knows how to give me a gift. I hate getting crystals.
Yeah.
And so that was a very special moment to me. And years later, Tulkula didn't really, I mean, he has the habit of playing with the neurosis of people completely. So the moment you can get close to him, it's more a sign of, yeah, you're just who you are. You're not fucked up, you're just who you are. But the moment people have neurosis, oh, please help me, or you're so special, he will whip and make fun of them and just throw them away and do all kinds of things to them just to get them like, listen, you're not human, you're just a puppet right now.
Sounds like Gurdjieff.
Yeah. Well, there's a tradition, right? It's actually a tradition and a style in Vajrayana. There's lamas who are very kind and very, very intelligent, and then there's lamas who are wrathful. They call it wrathful, and if there's a truly wrathful lama, from the outside he's going to appear that he's just tearing you to pieces. That's what it feels like to be around somebody like that. But it's always beneficial if it's a genuine one. They really know what they're doing. So it's not random asshole, being an asshole or something like that.
No, at all.
It's really they're like skilled shamans who can go right to your deepest neurosis and just rip it out of you. I've had that happen, and I think if that kind of experience is really a wonderful experience to have. Like, I know my teacher was like that with me for a while, and when he stopped being that with me, I was kind of disappointed because I thought, oh maybe he doesn't, he's not paying attention to me anymore. So if a wrathful lama is just knows where to push all your buttons, it's a good thing.
Well, that's what crazy wisdom is, isn't it? So
yeah, it's part of it.
Yeah. I want to go back to what Turio just mentioned, because we discussed this already before, that we will bring it up tonight. Because I wanted to talk to Tim and Andrew about this, but now having Turio on board as well, I think it's the perfect episode to talk about Rangtong and Shentong. So can you describe how you define the difference between Rangtong and Shentong? So I have my Japanese Zen version of it, but can you describe Rangtong and Shentong, the difference? Andrew, you want to start, and then Turio, and then Pick. I want to have Tim.
Well,
I want to have your definitions of what's Rangtong and what's Shentong, because obviously it's a dialectical relationship.
Okay. Well, first I'll say I'm not great at philosophy, and these are very fine. People argue about these things, to no end, and I wouldn't say I have a handle on it, but I would say that the empty, of self. The Rangtong is kind of the Dalai Lama school, and they're scholarly. They argue. They philosophize. They're very conceptual, right? Whereas the Shentong, empty of other, tend to use less intellectual means to teach you things. So it's more about the direct experience of Buddha nature or the nature of mind, they call it.
So,
right?
so
But
Andrew,
even if you don't attach to that as an idea,
Andrew, you decided to disqualify the argumentation. You decided to go with the guys who were the nicest.
The nicest, absolutely not. The Kagyu and the Nyingma are the ones that are the Shentong are much more radical than the Dalai Lama.
Wait, radical. Are they tougher on you in your practice?
No, they just have a more radical understanding of the nature of mind and reality.
But radical is kind of
the monks kind of stay on the monks kind of stay on the intellectual.
Back to what you just said. Back to you. I asked you to describe Rangtong Shentong according to you. You didn't describe them at all. You described the followers and what kind of personalities they are, which is fine.
Well, no, I said Rangtong is supposed to be empty of self nature. It's about emptiness.
Yes,
so
I know.
Emptiness. It's about the emptiness of everything. So it's ultimate deconstruction, right? So it's emptiness. Okay, yeah. But that in a way ends up in nihilism. So usually the Shentong people are accused by the Rangtong people as being theists. Because they don't believe in emptiness. They don't believe in deconstruct. They're like the ultimate postmodernist. Nagarjuna is like the ultimate postmodernist deconstructionist. He deconstructs even deconstructionism, and it just goes on and on and on and on and on. And you know, whereas the Buddha nature schools, the Mahamudra schools, they talk about luminosity. They you know, the tantric realm is working with forms, it's working with luminosity, it's working with energy. It doesn't deny those things. It doesn't deny you know, so it's non-duality of luminosity and emptiness. It's not a mere emptiness.
Okay.
Let me jump in here.
Tim next.
With
Yes.
that. So Shentong, I would say to put a cap on that, emptiness is form and form is emptiness. And a big part of this is the skillful means of using the body, being part of the world. You go off and do your retreats, yes, but you bring it back. And with our previous, I think this is very important. When we previously spoke, you asked, what did Egypt bring to the table? And what they brought, and what Greece had but was losing, was a perspective of eros, of love and participation between the masculine and the feminine, and the integration. And you know, and that's what Tantra means, right? You know, it's you're weaving together. You're weaving together the body and the spirit. Everything, and this is from Freemasonry all through all the higher tantras. You're doing things to bring the mind, and you're you know, I'm pointing to my solar plexus here. You're raising the physical aspects, those energies up to your heart, and uniting with the energies from the mind, the masculine and the feminine. And I think that's crucial, and that's what we were speaking of in regards to Shentong about Dzogchen and that view, and the Vajrayana view of which we've argued about around Pure Land, not a pure. And this is key, because the same split happened in Alexandria between the Gnostics and the Hermeticists, whether or not the world is evil and should be left. And on both takes, it's a no. It is not evil. It is to be worked with. This is skillful means, and bringing back what you learned from retreat, from your experiments with the mind, bringing that back and integrating it with the sociont.
All right. So there's the Rangtong and the Shentong Tim definition there. So Turio, do you want to pick up on the central question here?
I'm going to preface that the Shentong view came out of the quote-unquote last teaching from Buddha, as they say. So Kalachakra is the last school and the most complicated system that has been developed across the Tibetan plateau. And the Shentong view has been a response from this guy, Dolpopa, to the Rangtong view.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not as if Rangtong is wrong. It's not completed. It's like they stay it. If I would use, I think you used ironic nihilism as one terminology. I would say by the maximum, they stay at ironic and nihilism. The Shentong view tries and endeavors to jump to affirmative nihilism.
Yeah, I was going to say that too. Yeah, that's right.
So the Rangtong view is I'm empty, I'm empty, nothing is there, not even any concept, no school, like pure nihilism. It's like constantly cutting away. But if the critique is, if people stay there, then there is a question about compassion. There's a question about skillful means. There's a question about where does this lead? It's like the endless navel gazing, and many Tibetan teachers are actually, not many, but yeah, many or most of them are pillar saints. And there's few of them who are authentically initiated and go with this Black Chukyam Trungpa or other crazy wisdom teachers. And this guy told Popaim, and that tradition has been butchered by the Tibetan traditions. Dalai Lama himself denied that tradition to flourish because there was some historical connection to Genghis Khan, because he was part of that tribe. So that's the difference I have. The Rangtong is more to be understood as a step towards Shentong, but if you stay at Rangtong, it's not completed.
Okay, then I've got to defend Rangtong then, because you guys are apparently sided with Shentong, all three of you. So the point is that Rangtong would argue exactly the opposite. So the proper Rangtong position is that no, Shentong is not finished. Shentong is not radical enough. Shentong does not seek truth, ultimately. Shentong, the point is that Shentong finds a ground, but just one ground. And then everything else is otherness, and every otherness is negation of the ground, and therefore is nothingness. But you do have one ground. You assume one ground. So for example, we take the concept of the one in philosophy. In Shentong, the one is real. The one is the unity of everything. It's not just non-duality, it is monism itself. Whereas in Rangtong is Hegel, more than anything, it's Schelling in European philosophy, in opposition to Kant. It's Schelling who, at an old age, even ignores the Hegelians and Hegel's students. He liked Hegel. They were old roommates and everything, but Hegel's students, they were just obnoxious. They thought they've seen everything. They've seen the absolute. So he disregarded them. So Schelling at an old age went for what he called absolute nothingness. And the Japanese Zen masters love Schelling for it, because Schelling is still a huge name in Japan, together with Hegel, because Schelling was the one who really pursued absolute nothingness. And I think you nailed it when you say the Rangtong is ironic nihilism, and then Shentong tries to be an affirmative nihilism on top of that. I don't mind that both are there, and actually this is the split in Zoroastrianism too. It's one of those rare occasions where I would probably side with the Ahura rather than Masta. But if the Ahura is being and the Masta is mind in Zoroastrianism, we are returning to the same division, probably because both are necessary to create a full priesthood. But it's really the priest who's supposed to pursue the ironic nihilism around Rangtong, and the Shentong is created for the king, is created for the chief to lead the sociont, because otherwise the sociont would perceive the world as nihilistic. So the problem is that in the tantric realm, the world is nihilistic, but people couldn't handle that. So because they can't handle that, it has to stay within the priest. And they're prepared for it. They have the psyche to handle that. They might even enjoy it. They must not go pillar saints if they do. That's when they make the mistake. But to be Rangtong is to understand the ultimate freedom of absolute nothingness. And
that's great, Alexander. That's exactly where I disagree with you, and I've always disagreed with you. But that's still wonderful and radical. That's like that is. I think.
What is it that you disagree with?
That's Hegel. That's Hegel, because it doesn't lead beyond a conceptual school, and that's the problem with the Dalai Lama school as well. It doesn't lead beyond a conceptual school. And you're wrong to say that. Well, let me finish. You're wrong to say that there's no ground.
Let's stop moralizing, Andrew. Let's be honest here.
Let me finish. Let me finish.
Stop moralizing.
Well,
stop saying that people are evil or good or whatever.
I didn't say that.
The arguments themselves.
I never said anybody was evil or good, Alexander, and I'm not moralizing at all.
Yes, you are.
No, I'm not.
You're moralizing here. You're moralizing. You say there must be a beyond, because otherwise the world will fall apart.
I didn't say that.
That's not intellectually honest.
I didn't say that.
I mean, to me,
let me fucking finish, okay? I didn't say any of that, and I'm not moralizing. I'm saying when you introduced me to Hegel a little bit, I went, "Wow, that's incredible. That is the understanding of shunyata, nothingness. It's amazing. It's incredible, but it's not the whole story. That's not moralizing."
What do you mean it's not the whole story? That's not an argument, Andrew.
The whole story is Shentong.
Why?
Because
you'd like
there's
it more?
also there's apophatic nothingness, and then there's the arising of luminosity from nothingness.
Because you like that, but that's
Shentong.
not an argument.
But that's reality, because something does arise from nothingness. That is, and it isn't a bland. It isn't a bland one. Or
No,
anything
no,
like that.
Andrew, this is a vulgar understanding of Rangtong and Shentong, to be honest about it. The thing is this, how much of nothingness can you handle? And where do you locate
This
the
is
nothingness?
existentialism. It's not. It's just anyway.
No. If you can't handle nothingness, you can't. If nothingness makes the sociont fall apart, it must be kept in a container. That's why I'm saying that there are these two traditions. There's Rangtong and the Shentong. There's a constant argument in the monasteries, constantly between the two.
Yeah, they belong together.
It's repeated as Ora versus Gnostic Zoroastrianism too. It's repeated with the Gnostics and the Arminians. Thanks, Tim, for pointing that out. It's repeated in Alexandria too. Yes. And of course, we take side with the medicist. Of course, we take side with the mass theist. Of course, we take side with any one of those who says that I'm going to be in the affirmative because I'm going to lead people towards the future and they got to have a hope. Of course, we take sides with that. I don't argue against it. But if I'm going to pursue the ultimate truth, I don't care. I don't care.
The ultimate truth is post-apophatic. It's not.
No.
It's not just nothing.
No, I need to point out, I said there is a relationship between those two. When I transfer that to method, the one is trying to cut himself into pieces. The other one wants to understand whatever he sees outside himself has also to be cut into pieces. And that's like practice-wise, there is a dialectic between it. If I cut everything outside of myself and see that is shunyata, that is emptiness, that is going to refer back to me that there must be emptiness here as well. In the same time, I start here with emptiness. So that there is, to me, that is practice. That is relevant for me to understand, okay, I go somewhere. If I'm projecting the shit out of the world, if I'm constantly in fear, if I can't deal with any situation, then I don't see the emptiness there. If I use that.
Well, your emptiness is your own subjectivity because your mind creates your sense of subjectivity, and that's all there's to it. And then it chases itself, and that's why it won't give up. And that's why there's a subject. The subject is the ultimate Ouroboros. It chases itself and it refines itself, and that's why it's still there the next moment too. That's sunyata. But the schools agree. On this, the schools agree because the grounding in Shentong is placed outside of that. It's an external ground, but it's a ground to which everything else is emptiness. So we have emptiness everywhere except one in Shentong. We emptiness everywhere in Rangtong. But here's my argument. Okay, if we imagine that these schools had actually existed for 10,000 years in parallel, let's take the paradigmatic view, which is what I do with nihilism. So let's take seriously that this is ironic nihilism and affirmative nihilism. The problem is that the affirmative nihilism, say in this case the Shentong, to believe in a ground that makes sense, the ground of the sociont itself, it has to be time specific. It has to be the historic age we live in. It has to be the kind of tribe we have. It's the kind of topography we live in. Speaking of landscapes, if it's a mountain tribe, it has to be a mountain ground. If it's a river valley tribe, it has to be a river valley ground. The ground, which is ultimately the sociont itself, the environment in which the sociont lives and survives and thrives, or the landscape across which it moves. There's a paradigm there, and that's the affirmation. And for the vast majority of time, leadership is about the Shentong. Leadership is about the affirmation. But when the paradigm falls, when the paradigm collapses because of drastic technological changes or seismology, an earthquake or something, or an asteroid came falling in and almost everybody died or whatever. But if the disaster happens and the paradigm's over, the only place to go is to go to the mountain and go completely ironic, nihilistic, and be totally nihilistic and say there are no values. We have to build new values. There has to be a new ground, or the ground returns in a new form. So do you see that I see Shentong as necessary, but I would put it on the chief. And this is what you tell leaders to tell. So the speech from the leader has to be the Shentong speech. But I wouldn't say that Shentong is superior or Shentong is beyond or Shentong is deeper. I think that's a terrible mistake. I think Schelling was right to pursue absolute nothingness, and obviously found that there wasn't even anything in his own subjectivity. There's just nothing there. Because ultimately, we human beings create eternalizations. We are creating ontology. The ontic world exists independently of us. We create the ontology. The ontology is created by human beings. And this is why there's a point to the Rangtong perspective, because it's ironically the only ground that's left when there's no ground.
But how come you put the ground in Shentong outside?
The ground,
The ground is everywhere. Everything is emptiness. Like I said, emptiness is form, and form is emptiness.
yeah, but there's a ground in that, in Shentong. That's Shentong. Otherwise, you're doing Rangtong.
Well, I
Rangtong
mean,
is layer after layer after layer after layer of emptiness, and even further emptiness infinitely. That's Rangtong. That's Zen.
That's
Well,
That's
Zen.
Zen and that's Rangtong, and absolutely, absolutely, but it's not Tantra.
No, true.
It's prior to Tantra, and it isn't really that Tantra is better. It's just that it just feels better to people who are doing it, perhaps because they like it more, or they like it's more playful, and it doesn't.
That's a really good point, Andrew, because you're right. Because when you do tantric exercises, if you do sexual tantra, the phallus on the matrix, the dick and the pussy.
Yeah, I was wondering if
are
Rangtong.
grounds. They're grounds.
I was wondering if
if you do the
feminine.
psychedelic, if Turio and I do a psychedelic ceremony, the ayahuasca itself, we talk about it as mother ayahuasca. It's a ground. You can't do tantric exercise without creating a ground within the container. That's true. That's a really good point, Andrew.
well, and let me point out,
In practice, that's a good point for Shentong, definitely.
all of mysticism seems
related.
to come back around to an idea of love and of bliss. There, you get to a state where you've done your mystic practices and you get to a certain point where you're full of bliss. You're experiencing the light. And there's an alternative, I think, really a failure that pops up, particularly in the West, but it does come up in the East, the idea of your goal is to not have emotions. Your goal is to stop thinking. Decreasing your sensory input is skillful means to dive deeper, but then to bring back that pearl of wisdom. And I've said this before, what's the big deal? Bliss, man.
Yeah, and
And
there's the
uniting
trap
with
of
the
emptiness.
world.
It's interesting, there's the trap of emptiness is often described, and I think the danger of Rangtong is getting trapped in emptiness, getting trapped in no thingness, getting stuck there. And it's described in stages, of meditation. You can read books about it. It's like somebody experiences no thingness, and it feels ultimately satisfying because there's just all the anxiety of existence is gone, and then something else arises and you have to go back into the world, so the trick is how do you keep that understanding of emptiness in the intensity of the world at the same time. That is a higher state of meditation. If we
Yeah,
can
but that's not Rangtong. That's in both traditions. We talk about pure experience. That's in all Zen traditions. So both the Soto, Rinzai, the Rangtong, Shentong are doing that. What we talk about here is the infinite now, the bliss state. And for me, the bliss state is fake if the bliss state is hedonistic. Can we agree on that? But the absolute bliss state is there if it is the dissolution of me. I can die, I can leave, I can pass the world on to the next generation, and that's fine. I will be reincarnated as an archetype the way I was the reincarnation of an archetype, and just bliss. off we go. That's lacking in Zen. We've agreed on that before, Tim and Andrew. And I'd love to hear Turiyo's take on that too, because Turiyo has been working with Chuma, Huasca, and you've been in hell, you've been in heaven with people many times over, Turiyo. So what is your experience of the infinite now and the bliss that Tim just talked about? Because that's not that I would like to leave out of Rangtong and Shentong, and we can go back to Rangtong and Shentong and see what's compatible with the infinite now. It's a different question. What do you say, Turio? How you dealt with bliss?
How do I? There's nothing to deal with.
Yeah, that would be bliss. No thing, and it's not like a high. It's very interesting. It's not a high, and you could be in the most pain in the world, and that would be present, or you could be in the most pleasure in the world. It's neither of those things. It's not even a state of pleasure. The way this kind of bliss is described. It's described as clear light, right?
I mean, if I would just look at the last ceremony we had, I mean, there is these places where in the ceremony I just sit up and sit in silence and enjoy that. There is nothing in the middle of a ceremony. Ayahuasca gets silent, everything gets silent, and then the pendulum swings again. And then I'm forced to go into the peak of these experiences, feel the pain, feel the nauseousness, feel the orgasmicness of all of this. And maybe we could say that the former is the Rangtong and the latter is the Shentong.
No. We call them pure experience, which is
okay.
And infinite now. So what we're doing in our work, which is very Vajrayana, by the way, and Sufism, if you're going to do Sufism with the Z, is that instead of staying with only the Zen and the pure experience, and instead of going too much on the Vajrayana tantric and the bliss, we try to incorporate both as two extremes. Because the funny thing we discovered, Turio, is that both in the infinite now, the most intense emotional experience you could possibly have, and the pure experience, which is just nothingness, right? Both those two are selfless.
And that is the ground. We walk on them.
Yeah. But in between them is your dialectical subjectivity. It's the Monday morning cup of coffee, go to work, everyday life. And the funny thing is that your subjectivity is at its strongest, your sense of self is at its strongest when you're active in the world having a cup of coffee to go to work. It's not, you get away from the ego, you get away from the self, you're absorbed by the world, you're disilluted into the world. Precisely in the emptiness experience of pure experience and in the infinite now. And what's problematic with neurotic cultures like the Japanese is that they're terrified of the bliss. What's problematic with more psychotic cultures like Peru and Tibet is that they tend to ignore the possibility of the emptiness. So we try to incorporate both in our work here.
But what is then the ground? When I talk about the ground, I experience in both places. You talk about that's a selflessness.
Yeah, could be, yeah.
Well, that's what I was trying to point
That's what
to.
I'm referring, because that's what comes back to me when I remember the ceremony viscerally. Yes, there have been deep swings of any like torrents, whatever. Then there has been this kind of bliss of the silence, but there is a ground that carries through from both places, which is like unobstructed by whatever comes in that experience. And that is something that is interesting to ground. Literally to ground.
Philosophically speaking, the ground is the sociont itself and our service of the sociont. The sociont was there before we were born. The sociont will be there the day we die. And then we discover we were actually born and we die every day. We're born and we die every moment. Life and death are constantly present everywhere. But this specific body, with this specific expression of a certain archetype that's here to serve the sociont, is who I am for the 90 years or so that I might be lucky to live. So the sociont is that ground. I would agree. The sociont is the ground philosophically because human beings are real human beings and we're a flock animal and we're serving humanity stuck on a certain planet we're supposed to serve as well. But the sociont is that ground in that case. So the service of the sociont, because the sociont gave birth to us, the sociont loves us, the sociont what we leave. I think this is where Tim Pickerill probably is different from Mark Gaffney, because Mark Gaffney talks about love in some kind of cosmic sense. But I think Tim agrees with me that we talk about love and compassion. It's the love and compassion towards and from the sociont, right? That's the ground. That's true.
And then I have to say, on that ground, Rangtong and Shentong, I don't care.
Yeah.
Because then it's like we built these castles on top of that.
That actually agrees with the idea that Shentong is the dominant mode and should be so, and Shentong is the message of the king because it's the leadership of the sociont as it walks forward into the future. There can only be Shentong there. So it's a kind of the sutra, the tantra. You cannot do tantra without the sutra first, and in this sense, Shentong is past priority. The Rangtong is more, to me, obviously, there are lots of dangers of Rangtong. You can get high and then become a fucking Gnostic pillar saint, and I hate you to guts. I want to kill you, right? I get that, Andrew. It's not for the masses in any whatsoever. But the Rangtong perspective is interesting as philosophical training. And I would actually recommend people who really want to go into spiritual practice and become proper students and become monks or monks and nuns or whatever, to really, really practice both. Because I think ironic nihilism has a very important role, right?
I wonder if the Rangtong is the queen, if you said the Shentong is the king, because often the imagery of emptiness is feminine in Buddhism. So maybe the Rangtong is the queen. This is just or in your language, Alexander, the one who is sort of the grounding of the sociont, or
no.
No?
The Shentong is the chief, the Rangtong is the priest. Woman is in between the two. Woman is a dialectic between the two.
Okay.
So what I would add then...
Women would probably agree with us if they were here that they are both at the same time.
So let me refer back to the naming of the Kalandaria Sufis. If we take the Sufis who are in the marketplace, who do all these kind of crazy behaviors, just being situated in the marketplace, wouldn't we go as far as say that is nihilistic, ironic nihilism in that place?
I would think the Kalandari and Bektashi are sort of the ironic nihilist and probably the only Western Rangtong we have.
And I think that the importance here is, and I said that before, is I think the fact that the core of that spirituality, whether it's Sufism with Z or S, is the fact that they use the cloak to cover the spirituality. So maybe Rangtong is definitely the inside view of, I have the cloak, you don't see what's inside, that's hidden, and that only belongs in the monastery where I can show it actually. So like a kind of barred absolute to have between these two.
Yeah.
That was one thing I was going to definitely bring up with our orientation to thinking about metaphysics, and consciousness and mysticism together. That one thing that connects them all is the barred absolute. You have to experience. Without the experience, you're lost in trying to figure out what people are talking about in all this. And in the discussion about place of Rangtong and Shentong, I think in the West there's a perversion that has been going on and is going on of people seeing the Rangtong, the ironic nihilism, and seeing that as the practice. And this came about largely, I think, through Zen entering America, and how that has been projected and spread, and this twisted view that people develop around that. But then also, you get Tantra coming in and going exactly the opposite way, where they see it as sex. They see it as Kama Sutra. And they don't see the integration, which is necessary of the two.
Yeah, that's a good critique of Western Buddhism is, on one hand, you have this reductionist, nihilist, materialist kind of Yuval Harari version, Sam Harris version of Buddhism, a kind of a, updated Zen without all the trappings or any of the
That's
difficulties.
because of capitalism.
This
Capitalism
is one thing.
packages things. It packages things. So you take
And
you
just let
take
me,
things away from context and package them to put together only the individual mix when you go shopping.
yeah, yeah, and then
That's
on
American capitalism.
and then on
That's
the
why. That's why.
other and then on the other extreme is just as we've already talked about this to death, but the sort of entirely new agey feminism, experience based or spirituality, right? That doesn't have the emptiness, that's lacking in that emptiness. So it is,
What's
you do have to have both. I think you do really do have to have both.
Yeah, but let me point out one thing. I think the reason why Zen and the pure experience cult became huge in America was because so many Americans are coming out of really traumatized Protestant Christian
Yeah.
environments. So they come
They
out of
are
this
Protestants.
wait. It's like they have to escape from the Mormons in Utah. They move to San Francisco. They come out as gay, and suddenly, why do they love Zen? Simply because when they die, they want to be buried and properly mourned because they're really dead when they die, and they don't want a single Christ on a cross anywhere near where they're being buried, right? So I think the big lie, we have to deal with the big lie. The big lie is the afterlife in Islamic Christianity. That was the big lie that the West got stuck on. And I can understand why the pure experience and Zen Buddhism was incredibly attractive, because it was the most radical alternative to the big lie, in that you're not even going to die. There's nothing even there to die. That's the radical Rinzai Zen perspective, which is, of course, the Japanese version of the Rangtong.
But can we throw in some Gurdjieff here? And I think alchemy is important as well. With Gurdjieff, he was deconstructing people, right? But the goal was to build something else out of that, to take it apart and rebuild it as an integrated, functioning human being.
Yeah.
His whole, and I don't want to get into a argument around reincarnation, but his theory of that was that most people do not reincarnate, let alone our argument around it's you yourself are not the one that's reincarnating.
We call it the reincarnation of the archetype. That's the reincarnation.
Yes.
Yeah, always was the reincarnation.
But in the process, and this goes back to Egypt, they had this saw body. Your entire, everything that you were doing was to build a spiritual body. However you want to think about that, it's what I just said about Gurdjieff.
Yeah.
And this fits in with alchemy. You have to go through a process of digging in, pulling out all the shit, dealing with it, and then integrating that and building that back up. You had the Mithraic ladder of the seven. The paper that I wrote on theurgy relating to the Corpus Hermeticum, they clearly stated that you're going, and you have the same thing in Tantra, where you're proceeding through guru yoga. In that process, you have invocations of what you're giving up, what you're removing, what you're shedding.
Which is your entire self-identity, like everything. If it's that radical in Gurdjieff, right? It's like,
yeah, it's Zoroastrianism. It's pure Zoroastrianism. It's Haurvatat, meaning wholeness.
yeah.
And if you're lucky, the day you die, you're supposed to lie on your deathbed and just said, "I did it. I was the archetype for my generation. The archetype had a presentation. I did okay, and I don't want to do anything more. There's only a repetition left for me to do. I'm over." right? So you die with a smile on your face. That's the point with the Harvatat. And the Harvatat has exactly this lifelong journey, both for men and women. In Zoroastrian culture, for everybody who actually engages. That's the whole point.
Well,
But
yeah, I
life
mean,
is
Gurdjieff
well
would
lived.
say that. Can I just say about Gurdjieff? We're trying to create a soul that a deathless soul that survives death, and that's maybe where Alexander would, go
Yeah,
a
the
little bit.
problem, we can't even say that today because of Christianity and the poison Christianity is because they will completely misunderstood like you survive. If you haven't really studied Gurdjieff properly and realized how selfless all of this is and the self is gone by that time, then you miss the point entirely. So when I'm saying reincarnation, I'm totally for it. I'm saying reincarnation of the archetype. It's not you reincarnated. Actually, you died yesterday. And tomorrow you dead from today because you're another human being tomorrow. If you look at your subjectivity and you just look back the last 3 weeks, you said, well, I was a different person 3 weeks ago from I am now. You know what? You're a different person the next second.
Yeah.
You die and you're born all the time. If you realize that things die and are born all the time because that's a precondition from time, once you understand what time Zorovan is, and speaking of ironic nihilism, Zoroastrianism is the ultimate form of it, which is like the inner religion, the inner core of Zoroastrianism. So once you realize that, then the whole question is, well, what is alive then? The sociont is alive, and the sociont is expressed through as many archetypes as possible. And if those archetypes love each other and are compassionate towards each other, then you have a thriving sociont. The religious practice is all about contextuality. It's all about making sure that the relationship between the different members of the sociont are as loving and respectful as possible for the sociont to thrive. That's the point of religious practice, the ultimate point of it. And then you realize that was reincarnated are the archetypes. The archetypes return. So when I met Turio the first time, I saw instantly this guy has a liking among the other guys. He has a certain spiritual about him. He's the kind of guy who walks out of the wilderness completely cool about it. And that is Turio. You can take Turio into a room of 400 people going absolutely berserk, and he just walks quietly through the whole room and serves tea or whatever.
And we have to get him to talk, right? We're
it's going to be
pull
one of our
something out
practices
of pull
eventually.
something
Turio
out
and I
of.
will take Tim and Andrew on a practice.
Whereas me
Tim
and
can
I'm
take
just going
all
to
three of us on
shout
a
at each
practice.
other. We're just going to shout at each other to the. Yeah,
But
well, I was thinking.
when I met Turio the first time, I saw he had that sort of brotherly feel. He was different from the other men, but they saw something in him that they needed. And that was just the archetype that I saw in Turio. It wasn't Turio. And then I've learned to know Turio as a friend over the last 2 years, and we're working more and more together. But the point was that I just knew Turio. Yeah, he's going to be one of my guys or close to me because his archetype matches mine. They're matching archetypes, and that's your best friends forever. They're just matching archetypes. They're like, we should be team, and then you realize you're a team.
Goosebumps. I love that.
I'm wondering about Rangtong and Gurdjieff, like that he was so brutally deconstructive of the human being. He said people were machines, mechanical man, and they just needed to be destroyed basically. And that is emptiness. That's what emptiness does.
I would rephrase it like
Let me finish, please. Let me get to the second half of what I want to say.
Go on,
Andrew. I just want to fucking say the second half because you cut me off in that first half. The second
How would I know?
is,
I'm not autistic. Okay, go on.
you are the most fucking autistic bastard I've ever met in my life. Anyway, but the second half is that once you've deconstructed everything, then you can have a soul, and that would be moving on to Shentong. That was my thesis.
I think it's more like, if I think about more paradigmatically, and I'm really creative tonight here with you guys, I would say the problem for Shentong is that Shentong has to fight the cynical and have to fight the naive. Whereas the Rangtong is always there and doesn't change. So it's comfortable for Rangtong. It's like if you're going to be a hermit, the extremist form of monk, which is like if you're going to be a hermit forever, you just have social issues. But if you're going to be a hermit for, say, 2 years or something, there could be point to it, right? And if you're going to hermithood, you certainly would pick Rangtong as your technique that you go towards. You wouldn't do the ground because you're not going to be with anybody. But once you return, you probably could teach Shentong beautifully because you've done the Rangtong, you finish with it. But I think to me, ironic nihilism is always at the bottom of everything, but it never rises above that point. That's why there's something not very productive about the Rangtong perspective. I will not stand in front of 100,000 people to try to lead them into the future and talk about saving the planet or anything, doing Rangtong.
Yeah.
You see how absurd that would be, right? So the Rangtong has another purpose. And if that is ironic nihilism, I did not see ironic nihilism. We wrote the Netocrats 25 years ago, Jan Söderqvist and I. We saw cynical nihilism, naive nihilism, and affirmative, and we saw them as paradigmatic, which Nietzsche had missed. We saw them as something that happens when a society goes through a revolutionary stage. If you read Nietzsche through Marx, you would see it. Nietzsche missed that point. So if nihilism are three different stages, then it's cynical nihilism, naive nihilism, cynical nihilism, and then affirmative nihilism, which is when you jumped over to the next paradigm. So you can create new values for new paradigm, and wonderful, your leadership, right? But the problem was I didn't see ironic nihilism. That only appeared like 5 books later, when we saw that there was something missing in the overall perspective. And then my first thought was that, so is ironic nihilism in between the cynical and the affirmative? No. Wait a second. It's a two-headed phallus again from Zoroastrianism. Ironic is parallel with affirmative. Not only is it parallel with affirmative and beneath affirmative, as if ironic nihilism, ironically, is the ground for the affirmative nihilism. Like if there's no ground out there, so the king uses the priest as the ground. And then he has the ground, and then it can be the king. It's almost that way it works. But here's the thing. I cannot take ironic nihilism into the sutra and preach it to people because that would be devastation. So it is instead the ideology which is always at the basis. So if I say that society is fucked, people are cynical, they're either naive about their nihilism or they're cynically nihilist, and therefore the world's going to go down. And society, I don't know if a new history could ever come. I don't know if a revolution could happen. You know, it's just going down the drain. It's all decadent. What I do is that I retract. If I say a revolution is impossible, I do retraction. What I do, I build a fucking monastery somewhere, isolate myself with a few guys, and we build a new chosen few. We build a new sociont from there, and then we don't care if the world goes down. That's how you use ironic nihilism. That's when ungrounding is an advantage.
Yeah, it's very cool that we can use Rangtong and Shentong in this way, you know, because normally you just read them in Buddhist books, and you know they're very theoretical but it's like way of using these terms.
It's a bit like an argument between a Buddhist and a Zoroastrian would be useless because they're just two different paths, but it's the same path. They're two different expressions, right?
Yeah, but that's what I wanted to comment on. Shentong to me is the closest idea to Zoroastrianism.
I hate you for saying this, but you're right.
Why?
Why? Because that's why I refer to this umbilical cord thing. The constant Rangtong nature of Buddhist Vajrayana practice to go into emptiness, to get rid of all the defilements and the attachments and all that kind of stuff. The Shentong view is the only place where I say, okay, this is the first place where I see, oh, somebody wants to contribute to society. Somebody wants to go into a different direction. But before that, nothing happens in the Tibetan culture. And that is the place they want to cut off the dick. How ironic is that? But then you have Zoroastrianism who says, fuck that. We're going to go there because that's nothing. Let's put it like that. There is a barred absolute. The Rangtong is nothing you ever going to touch. So we are only going to focus on this.
The way it worked in Zoroastrianism, Turio, was that this is why Zoroastrianism was developed as a religion for the priests among the priests. It was like, what if the ultimate truth suddenly appears before us and it would kill humanity? Say the recipe for the nuclear weapon. What do? You lock it up. You lock it up, and that's the Servanite cult. The problem was that the Servanite cult needed another response because it lacked the affirmative. That became Mithraism. That's where Tim comes in. Because the Mithraic cult spread to Egypt and Rome through the military, everywhere. The Roman army were all Mithraic. So the Mithraism was an affirmative response, which strengthens the idea that these are two sides of a two-headed phallus. So I would say Zoroastrianism is then in the feminine, in the family, in the community, in the sociont, to secure the sociont, so the feminine lies there. But with Zoroastrianism is the priest, whereas Mithraism then goes off and becomes the chief. And they're all three necessary. And I think it was the Servanite turn first. It was actually Apam Napat. It was the cult of the night god that resulted in the cult of the sun god. The initial cult was the moon god, was the night god. That became the sun god. And then in the Sutric version, They replaced the moon god, night god, because that was too destructive and too dark, because it was absolute nothingness. They replaced Tapranapat with Anahita. They brought in a woman, they brought in a goddess, and they had a complete. And this is, of course, the imitation of that is the Catholic Trinity of Virgin Mary and the Father and the Son. So I think that's a logical dialectical step. So I would agree with you, regretfully, but probably right, because Shentong is then Zoroastrianism. But the Servanite cult that I'm interested in for the next book, for Sufism, actually is the one that practices the Rangtong in Persian culture.
Here, what I need to add here is the Kala Chakra, where the environment of Shentong is the tradition with the most mixed influence. So you will find Vedic information more in that tradition than in any other sect in Tibet. So my guess is Kala Chakra was a response, especially to the Muslim invasion. And that's what they refer to many times. They don't want to publicly say these kind of things, but there is a response from Kala Chakra to the times of war and upheaval, where they try to synthesize a new system which includes a bigger perspective.
Okay, so here's the difficult question for you three Shentong guys. Pure Land. I'm not saying Shentong resulted in Pure Land, and Shentong is not guilty of it any more than Nietzsche is guilty of Hitler or any more than Marx is guilty of Stalin, all right? So, but it's definitely, there's no grounding for Pure Land anywhere in Rangtong.
Yeah.
It's impossible to connect with Rangtong. So there is something about Pure Land and Shentong, and you know, I don't think the big lie coming from Buddhism was any better than the big lie from Christianity and Islam. I think when you fool people into being slaves who work hard 6 days a week and go to church on the Sunday, and therefore they're going to go to heaven when they die and, you know, live forever. I think that big lie was just as distorted when it became Pure Land Buddhism. I've been to so many fucking Buddhist monasteries and temples, you have no idea. But every time I come into one of these fucking huge, kitschy, Pure Land Buddhist temples in Taiwan or whatever, I just hate it. I hate it the way I hate a Pentecostal Christian church. Because it built on a lie.
Come out of Manichaeism?
It came out of Manichaeism, didn't it? Right?
And, you know...
we should just say that Manichaeism exploded in the 3rd century, became the world's biggest religion. Mani was still alive. He was the most successful religious entrepreneur ever. I'm talking about a religious Elon Musk. He conquered the world. And Manichaeism succeeded with Christianity and failed. It broke into the East, became incredibly influential, till, even if you talk about Uyghur culture, for example, today in Western China, East Turkestan, still drenched in Manichaeism. So Manichaeism influenced Buddhism, influenced Taoism, and its influence was probably the beginning of Pure Land. I agree with you. Tim, do you want to have a take on that?
Yeah, well, the critique on Pure Land Buddhism and what you're bringing up is important, but I think even more important is the Shentong idea of the Pure Land being here. This is it. And earlier, I wanted to kind of put a cap on the idea around reincarnation, and by saying, what are you waiting for? What, you know, you're here now. You're not in this supposed or possible next life. You are here. Experience that. You know, space is mind, and the experience of that is clear light and bliss. And
it's what we call momentalism.
Yeah.
And
the total focus on the present. Yeah.
It's interesting. I'm starting to understand Alexander's point here, that maybe Rangtong is truth, but Shentong is play, or and so that's the radical thing about Vajrayana. It knows the truth, but then it introduces all of this play afterwards. So
You're right.
Let me finish. I don't
Okay.
think that Pure Land is anything in the same ballpark. I don't have much love for Pure Land. I think it's a popular religion and people need that. It would seem, and I don't have anything particularly against it. I don't love it, but I don't think it's the same thing as after you've understood emptiness and all this whole sort of world of Vajrayana comes in, and it's radically playful and bizarre, and you know it's not like Indian philosophy, which leads to just Atman, nothingness and bliss. It also has this creative aspect, and that's the radical thing about it. That's why it considers itself to be radical and not like other, Indian religion, or at least it says so. So I don't know if that makes any
So
sense.
you're right. You're absolutely right. This is
Well,
really
let me ask you a question then.
the
How do we
Rangtong
stand
is
this
the
up?
pathos, and the Shentong the Shentong is the pathos, and the Rangtong is on the logos. And logos is always boring but true, right?
Well,
Okay, go.
so how do we Vajrayana Zoroastrians stand up this against the Gnostic trend that's been going on for 1700 years, basically? Or you could say, since really the academy was destroyed, 1500 years of Gnosticism and this idea that this is not where you want to be, and we're all getting ready to
The
head on.
positive aspects of appearance, like that's what Vajrayana is. That's why Vajrayana is Shentong, the best Vajrayana, because it positivizes appearance, reality. It doesn't say that it's somewhere else. That's the Gnostic dualism. It's right here, but right here is something not perceivable through banal, ordinary cognition. In your day to day, you have to make a quite a leap.
It's the
I answer Zoroastrian. I answer there's truth and there's falsehood, there's lie and there's truth, and debating is the only way to get there. I firmly believe in liberal democracy idea. The way to deal with Hitler and Stalin is debate them down. And if you can't debate them down, you get a fucking gun. But the Gnostics, yeah, it's escapism. Some people know they're walking into it, and they're cynical nihilists, according to me. But as we are now historically after Nietzsche and everything, nobody can make it. Nobody with reasonable mind can have an excuse any longer for buying into the big lie. And I hate the fucking neo-Christian trend. I find it disgusting.
And that's where we're at right now. We got
Totally cynical. It's Hillary Clinton goes to church. That's what it is. I hate it.
got Hamas, the evangelics in Congress, and the Zionists in Israel all fighting over a Gnostic idea of the
They
end
want
time.
their fucking
That's serious.
Armageddon, and the rest of us have to stop them.
Yeah. So maybe the thing that's Zoroastrian about Shentong is this emphasis of the positive qualities of ultimate reality, rather than just saying it's nothing at all, right? Or that nothing is positive. The no thing is a positive. It's not a negative. It's not a mere just destructive emptiness. It's
Wait. We can't do positive and negative as pluses and minus because they're not. Negation is not that. So that would be deeply unfair. So I'd say Rangtong and Shentong operate in parallel. They're actually two sides of the two-headed phallus. I didn't know that before tonight's conversation. Great, thank you guys. I totally agree with that. And what's interesting is the Rangtong has the logos to it. So the search for the absolute truth that is always there no matter what. The ungroundedness is the safest place to be because you don't have a ground to trust anywhere. But here comes the trick. You can't live with that. You can't build a society based on that. Society based on a sociont is ground. And that's why if I'm going to write philosophy and defend the idea of the sociont to say it took the millions of years to develop it, flock animals certainly stick to it, and certainly reasonably intelligent flock animal would certainly stick to the sociont. Try to even extend it as a concept. And if that's what we need to do in philosophy, then that's on the Shentong side. That's the pathos. That's also interesting where the feelings and emotions are.
Part of processing emptiness and causality is to understand dependent origination. You're not a static self sitting isolated. We have, 4 of us here.
I think Shentong is also young, and I think Rangtong is old.
Yes, correct.
Oh,
That would also make sense. So they're complementary again.
Yep.
yeah. The deities are represented as eternally 16 years old. Like,
I mean, this is great for running monasteries, the way Turio and I are planning to do it. It's brilliant. You teach the Shentong first for the young guys and tell them this is what you're going to do. You're going to be part of this. And then they will probably quite automatically at a certain age, when sex and drugs aren't as interesting as they used to be, go towards that Rangtong mode. Fascinating.
yeah, I'm not quite there yet with that, but like I don't quite agree yet. But
You're a Shentong guy, Andrew. We need a Shentong guy. You're the reincarnation of Shentong.
like I don't think like Rangtong is the ultimate reality. I think it's the last step before the ultimate reality. That's what I keep trying to say. But
I mean, that's why I referred before to the ground and not masturbating on the word Rangtong and Shentong. I have to say it like that, because all this stuff doesn't matter when you're there. It is completely senseless.
yeah, just words. But
No. I think it matters. I think it matters when a young monk comes to me and wants to know the truth.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
I have to give him the honest answer.
Yeah. In the experience, in
Yeah.
the ground, it doesn't matter. But for the sociont, that's whether we use the Shentong or Asha, I don't know. That's where this matters. Difference.
Yeah.
I was thinking of Chogyam Trungpa, right? He had this big like initiation, and everybody, studied for years to go to this massive initiation where he's going to introduce the nature of mind to people, because that's what they do in the Vajrayana. They introduce the master introduces you to the nature of mind as a direct experience, right? And so everybody's waiting for him, and he walks in, and he goes up to each person and gives them the finger like this. That's the nature of mind. There you go.